Welcome back again, this time to video 3 in this Mixing Emo series, where I'll break down how the bass was mixed. If you want to see how the drums were mixed, then go back to videos 1 and 2. The links to those will be in the description. And before I forget to mention it, if you make emo, pop punk or similar music and you'd like your next song mixed by me, then head over to terrybeckleyrecording.com and contact me using the contact form and say, hey, just hey, and I will get back to you. Right, let's get into it. Bass. So I've got 3 channels here, but it's not what you'd expect. I haven't split the bass up from sub, mid to high, or just sub and the rest of it. It is a main bass, a bass verse, and then a bass chorus, which are then all summed to this bass bus here. I know I did say I saturated every bus in the last video, but I saturate the instrument bus, which we'll get into at some point. So I didn't want to saturate the bass as well. Okay, so let's have a listen to where we are so far with the mix. As with the other videos, if you want to see what I used to get this bass DI, what instrument I used, hang around till the end and I will show you. Okay, bass. So I've got Parallax already loaded up here because that's the sound I would have worked with. I wouldn't just start mixing from a DI. I'd like to get some kind of tone in there first. Having said that, this the balancing between the low, mid and high would have been part of the mixing. So balancing bass is probably the toughest part of mixing bass. It's hard to know how much sub and low end you want in there, how much mid and how much high. And it has to be in relation to the rest of the mix and the guitars also. It has to connect the guitars and extend the low end of the guitars also. And then you want the mids to sort of either complement or fill in bits that the guitars might be missing. So let's hear the bass by itself with this Parallax. Okay, so it's quite clanky, hence why the high is brought down a bit, because I like that clankiness, but obviously you can push this into like metal territory, so we don't really want that this time. The mids I will have brought up and down until I felt like it connected to the guitars, and then the low end I would have brought in so that it was extending the range of the guitars, extending the bottom end of the guitars. So if we play the guitars and bass together, when I mute the bass, you should hear it suddenly thin out. Lose its size. So let's hear the guitars and bass together. I'll mute the bass and you'll see what I mean. See, there's a low end extension there when the bass is in. You can hear a bit of the attack of the bass that's sitting within the guitars. It's not sticking out from it. And the mids, if the mids weren't there as much, you would hear too much separation between the two. Okay, so I followed that up with a Pro Q3. So most important thing here would be the high pass filter. It is definitely dialed in with the kick drum in mind. I wanted the bass above the kick, so I did filter it out, but I wanted to get to a point where that low end felt big and constant. I didn't want to reduce the low end of the bass too much. And then beyond that, there are little cuts here which would help the kick drum come through. So here's 60 hertz, that would be the fundamental of the kick. I would have found that on a Pro Q3 on the kick, and then I would have cut this out of the bass so that it wasn't thinning the kick drum out. This here at 105 hertz is a dynamic that would have been a resonant frequency, and probably some mud here from the bass, which also would help the low end of the guitars come through. And then you got some horrible, nasty top end frequencies. Dynamic EQs bringing those down, reducing them, not killing them. In fact, if I play you the bass and the kick drum, hopefully you can hear that they lock in. It's a low end there, but the low end of the kick is still present. The bass isn't eating that up. That is what's so important about the low end of genres like this. And something else I should mention on Parallax is that I am compressing the low end. I didn't split the bass up and then limit the low end because I didn't need to, because Parallax has it split up anyway. It can still help, but I didn't need to in this case. So I've cranked this compression up because that low end has to be constant. It's so important in genres like this that the low end is there and has a lot of energy but doesn't disappear, and that the kick is there too. I don't sidechain kick and bass. I have never seen Pro Mixer in this genre do it. I'm sure it's been done a couple of times maybe. I'm sure there's cases where it happens, but As a general rule, I don't think it's a go-to. I think it might be solving particular problems. You want the low end to constantly be there. You don't want the kick poking holes in your bass. I mean, feel free to come at me with that. I'm sure there's hundreds of examples where it's a really good idea, but I just don't do it. What I'm saying is it shouldn't be a go-to. It should solve the problem. You should try it this way first. I think that's my advice. So let's just quickly listen to these bands soloed so you can hear why I was taking them out. Obviously, I want to reduce that build up there. We've got some mud here. And we've got what looks like probably bass honk here. Yeah, so it's just reducing it a bit, allows the low end of the guitars to come through. And then some clanky stuff up here. Yeah, that 1900, that's particularly horrible. Okay, compression. It's a pretty consistent DI, but the compressor gives it vibe as well as evens it out. You get the extra transient emphasis from a slower attack. I haven't gone for the fastest release. It's not the quickest song, so I've dialed that back into where I felt like the compression was moving with the song. Let's have a listen to the compressor off and on, because I feel like when you can get the compressor to bring the bass forward, it makes a big difference. I've completely gain matched that, the input and the output, but hopefully you can hear the transients. You can hear like a more of a donk as the bass is played when the compressor's in. Listen again. It does make a difference, I promise, even if you can't quite, even if it is super subtle like that. Okay, some EQ. Most importantly, probably boosting the lows. Yep, I love how the low frequency boost sounds on this SSL plugin. That's why I chose this one to do it. 65, so it's a boost just above the fundamental of the kick at 60. If you remember, we were cutting out 60 for the kick to fit in nicely. And then how much of this is just going to depend on how well balanced the track is. Really hard to get right, and probably take a couple of like taking out to your car, that kind of thing. Referencing all the time with other songs to get that to feel right. We've got a slight boost at 580 hertz as well. That would be to fill in some of those mids with the guitars. And the slightest of all boosts, 1K. That's a bit of the pick attack there. And then I'll be rolling off everything above 8K. I like a bright present bass. The slopes are quite gentle on here, so you can get away with going all the way to 8. Make some room for the cymbals. Let's hear the EQ on and off. The EQ really does make a difference. It does bring the bass forward more. Really does emphasize the good bits of the bass. I like it. And then lastly, one of my favorite plugins, Saturn 2, which is tape saturation, 20%. Quite a lot actually, especially with bass, but I would have taken it until I felt like it was making the bass sit in the mix a bit more. Let's hear that on and off. So this is with it off, and then I'll turn it on. That does such a nice job of thickening up that bass. Saturation, tiny little bits all over the mix just add up to something great, and it's really hard to put your finger on. But when I started using saturation, I felt like my mix has improved. And you can just go mad and try all different kinds of saturation because they're fun to mess around with. They are totally up to personal preference. So the bass verse will be the same. It will just allow me to manipulate the volume of the bass for the verses if I wanted to bring it down. So I do it as a matter of course, so I have that extra control. And then we've got this cool bass chorus track here, which only comes in the choruses. And this is quite fun. So I'll play the chorus of the song, and then I'll bring this bass chorus track in so you can see what it's doing. And it gives the song a lift. It makes the choruses bigger. Okay, so I'll play the chorus of the song, and then I'll bring in this bass chorus track, so you'll see what it's adding and how it helps make the choruses bigger. It's a subtle little extra bit of low mid growl, and it helps set the choruses apart from the rest of the song. So let's have a look what I've done here. So I've taken the DI, copied it from the main bass DI track, and put it through guitar amp. This isn't new. I haven't invented this. This is obviously an age-old trick. And I kept the amp and the cab the same as the guitar, so that it had some cohesion with it. The idea was to thicken it all up, not to add anything necessarily. So let's listen to it by itself, and it won't sound nice. So after that, we'll be reducing all the as much horribleness as I can get away with, so it sounds pleasant enough. And then most important thing when you're doing something like this, when you have two tracks playing the same thing and running them through different processing, is to phase align them. This is a step that really opens up doors for experimenting with stuff like this. You know, if you wanted to add the same guitar take but through a different amp, like I'm doing here, the same bass take but through a different amp, being able to phase align them allows you to really get creative and it not be at the detriment of what you've done. Let's have a listen to the phase off and on, and hopefully you'll be able to hear it's actually compromised before I phase aligned them. Hopefully you'll hear the low end sort of disappear. So you would kind of make this whole thing useless if I didn't phase align, because I would just be reducing the size of the bass instead of enhancing it, or I wouldn't be thickening it up, I'd be thinning it out. As you can see in the song, I've put that at the choruses, that it lifts the song in those moments and adds impact. So as promised, I will show you the bass instrument that I used. It is punk bass from Submission Audio. Sounds great for punk. Pick attack, consistent low end, and it's a P bass. I haven't tried the newer bass instruments that they've got, but there's enough articulations in here for punk and emo and that kind of stuff. You have slides up and slide down, mutes, dead strings, that kind of thing. And it actually goes down to drop C. I do find that a lot of sampled instruments don't go down that far. Right, okay, that's it. Thanks for watching. Next video will be mixing the guitars, so don't miss that. Subscribe if you want to make sure you see it. I'll try and get it up as quick as possible. If you want to see how the drums were mixed and you haven't already, the link's in the description to videos 1 and 2. And if you make this kind of music and you want your next song to sound like this, then head over to terrybeckleyrecording.com. Contact me there. The link will be in the description also. So we're getting into it now. Look forward to getting into the guitars and the vocals, and then all the different effects that we have on all the different tracks. Lots of delays and stuff coming up. I love delays. So thanks for watching, and hopefully see you at the next one.